So you're driving north on I-94, heading up to the Lake Michigan shoreline towards Milwaukee, and you pass through this city called Waukegan. Maybe you've heard of it. If you have, it probably wasn't for great reasons. Waukegan has what you'd call a reputation. A lower income area, not particularly desirable, the kind of place where people from wealthier Lake County suburbs don't really think about unless they're driving through on their way to going somewhere else. But then you take an exit towards the waterfront and suddenly, wait, what? There's this gorgeous marina with hundreds of boat slips. There are luxury cruisers docked in pristine conditions. There's a promenade, parks, a beautiful sandy beach, and if you look closely, you'll spot some seriously impressive houses overlooking Lake Michigan. And that's when you start asking yourself, what the hell is going on in Waukegan? Because here's the thing, the disparity isn't just noticeable, it's jarring. We're talking about a city where over 15% of the population lives below the poverty line, where the median household income is around $70,000, which sounds okay until you realize that's about 20% lower than the rest of Lake County, one of the wealthiest counties in Illinois. This is a city where, according to the most recent data, over 50% of the children in some areas live below the federal poverty line. And yet, right there on the waterfront, you've got this marina that's been operating since 1955 with 677 boat slips, hosting everything from modest sailboats to luxury cruisers over 100 feet long. You've got waterfront real estate. You've got what the city itself calls mixed-use marina-based development as part of this ambitious lakefront revitalization plan. So what gives? How do you have this tale of two cities, or really two Waukegans, existing in the same place? The answer is actually a fascinating story about American industrial decline, environmental disaster, economic segregation, and the complicated reality of waterfront development. And heads up, it gets a little dark before it maybe gets a little brighter. Let's start with history, because you can't understand Waukegan without understanding what it used to be. Waukegan was an industrial powerhouse. In 1850, right after the city incorporated, they built an artificial harbor on Lake Michigan, which is actually kind of unusual for the Great Lakes because there's no significant river flowing into it. But they built it anyway, and it became a major shipping and manufacturing hub. By the early 1900s, Waukegan Harbor was thriving. Factories lined the waterfront. The Outboard Marine Corporation built boat motors there. Johns Manville manufactured asbestos. Commonwealth Edison built a coal-fired power plant. Manufacturing jobs were plentiful and the city grew. But here's where the story takes a turn, and it's a turn that happened in industrial cities across the Rust Belt. Those industries that made Waukegan prosperous, they also poisoned it. In 1981, the Outboard Marine Corporation plant site and Waukegan Harbor were designated as a Superfund site. For those who don't know, being named a Superfund site is basically the EPA saying this place is so contaminated that it's a threat to human health and the environment, and it needs serious federal intervention to clean up. What contaminated it? Polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, heavy metals, the kind of stuff that accumulates as sediment and doesn't go away. For 100 years, industrial waste had been dumped into the harbor and surrounding areas. By the time anyone realized the extent of the damage, you had toxic sediment coating the harbor floor, groundwater contamination, and a waterfront that was essentially unusable. And it gets worse. The Johns Manville asbestos plant, that became another Superfund site in 1983. It's a 350-acre facility that manufactured asbestos from the 1920s to 1998. Yeah, 1998. Contaminating the air, groundwater, and soil with asbestos fibers. Today, even after the extensive cleanup efforts, there's still a 1-acre containment zone with warning signs that basically scream, keep out of here, danger, you're gonna die, basically. That site is capped with tons of dirt, just sitting there as a monument to industrial negligence. Oh, and there's also the Yeoman Creek landfill, a 70-acre Superfund site that operated from 1958 to 1969, accepting municipal and industrial wastes with no bottom liner. So the contamination just leaked straight into the permeable soil. This landfill is literally adjacent to apartment buildings where people live. And the coal-fired Waukegan generating station that operated for decades, creating coal ash ponds filled with arsenic, boron, manganese, chromium, and other toxins that have been leaching into Lake Michigan and contaminating groundwater. In 2019, the Illinois Pollution Control Board ruled that the facility violated environmental regulations and was responsible for groundwater contamination. The EPA once estimated that living near wet coal ash ponds like the ones in Waukegan could be more dangerous than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Let that sink in. In total, Waukegan is home to 5 active Superfund sites. 5. So, when industry started declining in the 1970s and 80s, when manufacturing jobs dried up and the company shut down, Waukegan wasn't left with charming old buildings that could be converted into trendy lofts. It was left with toxic wastelands. People who could afford to leave did. The tax base eroded, property values plummeted. Wealthier white residents moved to suburbs like Libertyville and Lake Forest, where median home values are over $500,000, compared to Waukegan's median of around $200,000. Waukegan became one of Lake County's poorest communities in one of Illinois' wealthiest counties. The population now is about 57% Hispanic, 18% white, and 16% black. Kids in Waukegan grew up with inhalers on the playground. Asthma attacks during recess were so common that students had a system for running to get inhalers. One resident, Eduardo Flores, who's now 19, remembers it being totally normal. That should horrify you because that's not normal. It's the result of decades of industrial pollution in a community that didn't have the resources or political power to fight back. So that's the Waukegan most people know, the struggling lower-income city with an environmental problem and a poverty problem. But then we get to the waterfront, and here's where the story gets complicated, because while the rest of Waukegan was dealing with industrial collapse and environmental contamination, something interesting was happening with that harbor. Starting in the 1990s and 2000s, there was a massive push to clean up the harbor. The EPA, along with the Illinois EPA and community groups like Waukegan Harbor Citizens Advisory Group, began the long, expensive process of environmental remediation. Between 2012 and 2013, the EPA dredged over 124,000 cubic yards of PCB contaminated sediment from the harbor. They capped remaining contaminated sediments, they monitored groundwater, they slowly removed what they called beneficial use impairments, basically official designations of environmental degradation. Beach closings removed as an impairment in 2011. Loss of fish and wildlife habitat removed in 2013. Restrictions on dredging removed in 2014. Degradation of phytoplankton and zooplankton removed in 2020. The harbor was being transformed from an environmental disaster into something that could actually be used again. And once that happened, opportunity appeared. The Waukegan Harbor and Marina today is a full-service, 677-slip facility that's professionally managed and actually gets great reviews. Boaters describe it as having top-notch facilities, floating concrete docks, excellent customer service, free ice, competitive rates, 24-hour security, and all the amenities you want. One reviewer called it hands down the best marina they've been to in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Chicago. Another said they've been a member for 10 years and the staff is exactly like family. And here's the kicker. Because of that Superfund designation and the cleanup efforts, the waterfront actually became more attractive for development. The city created a lakefront master plan envisioning mixed-use, marina-based development with diverse housing types, parks, retail, and an intermodal transit center. Some development has happened. There's a $5 million privately owned boating center completed in 2018. There's the historic Genesee Theater, a stunning movie palace built in 1927 that closed in 1989 and then was purchased by the city and renovated for $23 million, reopening in 2004 as a performing arts venue. And yes, there are some nice houses near the waterfront, not necessarily mega mansions, but properties in neighborhoods like Bonnybrook have median values around $305,000 compared to $145,000 in downtown Waukegan. So you've got this situation where the waterfront has become a draw for boaters, for people who can afford waterfront real estate, for tourists, for development. It's genuinely nice. I've been there. Reviews mention the beautiful lakefront, the promenade, the park, the public beach. I've gone and had a nice ice cream cone and dinner and sat by the water and listened to live music. It's a great way to spend a balmy summer afternoon. But here's the thing that makes this story complicated rather than inspirational. The revitalization of the waterfront hasn't lifted the rest of Waukegan. This is actually a textbook case of what urban planners call spatially isolated development, or waterfront gentrification. You clean up a small desirable area, in this case the lakefront, and it becomes a magnet for wealth. But that wealth doesn't diffuse through the community. Instead, it creates a bubble of prosperity that exists separately from the surrounding neighborhoods. Walk 3 blocks inland from that beautiful marina and you're in neighborhoods where poverty rates exceed 50% for children. You've got crumbling infrastructure. You've got schools that struggle with resources. You've got residents still dealing with the health impacts of living near Superfund sites that aren't fully remediated. A median home value in Waukegan is $175,000 to $203,000, depending on which data source you look at, far below the Lake County median of $300,000. About 51% of the homes in Waukegan are owner-occupied compared to 41% rented, with 8% vacant. Those vacancy rates tell you something about disinvestment. And while downtown Waukegan has been trying to revitalize with arts districts and theaters, a lot of boaters at the marina specifically note in their reviews that the area around the marina is lacking in regards to food, entertainment, and activities, and they wish the town had more going on. In other words, you can dock your luxury cruiser at this beautiful marina, but you're not sticking around to spend money in Waukegan's downtown because there's not much there. So what you have is essentially economic segregation within the same city. The waterfront has been cleaned up and developed, creating pockets of opportunity for people who already have resources, and people who can afford boats, people who can buy waterfront property. But the bulk of Waukegan's residents, the people who live through the industrial collapse and pollution, aren't benefiting proportionally. This isn't unusual, by the way. This is just a pattern you see in post-industrial cities across America. You get some targeted redevelopment, a waterfront, a downtown arts district, maybe a historic theater, but the underlying economic problems still persist. The good-paying manufacturing jobs that supported working-class families are gone, replaced by service jobs and gig work that don't pay nearly as well and aren't nearly as stable. But there's this perverse irony. The environmental cleanup that made the waterfront development possible was necessary because of the industrial activity that once provided good jobs to Waukegan residents. The very industries that employed the city also poisoned it, and once they left, residents were stuck with the pollution while the new development catered to the people from outside the community. Now, I don't want to be completely cynical. There are people in Waukegan working hard to address these disparities. There are community organizations, faith-based groups doing environmental advocacy, programs like Cool Learning Experience that teach kids about the environment and empower them with knowledge. The city itself has plans for broader waterfront development. The master plan envisions 35 acres of development on the 95-acre harborfront and 85 acres of development on the 240 North Harborfront area, with diverse housing types, retail parks, and better connections to the rest of the city. If those plans are implemented thoughtfully with genuine community input and a focus on creating opportunities for existing residents rather than just attracting outside wealth, maybe Waukegan can become more than just two separate cities occupying the same space. But that's a big if. Because the history of waterfront redevelopment in post-industrial cities is often a history of gentrification, where rising property values push out the very people who stuck with the community through its hardest times. So when you ask, what's the story with the huge disparity in wealth in Waukegan? The answer is that Waukegan is living with the consequences of the American Industrial Revolution capitalism. The benefits were concentrated when the industry was thriving, and the costs were concentrated when the industry collapsed. And the waterfront looks nice now because millions of dollars of public money went into environmental cleanup, creating an opportunity for private development. But the broader community is still dealing with poverty, pollution, and the loss of economic opportunity that came with deindustrialization. The two Waukegans exist because cleanup and development can happen in isolated pockets while systematic challenges remain unaddressed. It's easier to dredge a harbor and build a marina than it is to create good-paying jobs, or invest in schools, or address the health impacts of decades of pollution, or build wealth in communities that have been economically devastated. The next time you drive through Waukegan and see that beautiful waterfront, remember, it's real, it's nice, and it represents genuine progress from an environmental catastrophe. But it's also part of the story. The rest of the story is the neighborhoods you don't see from the marina, where people are still living with the legacy of industrial decline. That's the real Waukegan. Not just two disparate realities, but a city trying to figure out if it can bridge them. Who says luxury travel has to cost a fortune? Discovering Travel Bliss reveals the secrets to experiencing 5-star treatment without the 5-star price tag. Learn how to score upgrades, access exclusive experiences, and indulge in luxury for less. From hidden gem boutique hotels to insider tips for first-class flights, this book is your key to unlocking a world of affordable luxury. Elevate your travel experience without emptying your bank account. Get your copy today.